Joining us now on the phone from Ukraine is Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas. Now, first of all, Congresswoman, we hope that you are staying safe. You went to Ukraine to participate in talks to help avoid an invasion. Obviously, the attack came to pass. What are you seeing on the ground there? What can you tell us about how people are feeling there?
Well, I'm in the region, obviously, in order to be safe, not exactly in Ukraine for the safety reasons. But I will tell you that in talking to parliamentarians there who I'm associating with, have indicated that lives are being lost. People are being called up who are not in the regular army. This particular parliamentarian's son will be leaving tomorrow. He's 26 years old. Hospitals are being bombed. It's well known that Chernobyl has been taken, but also all of the engineers and other staff are now hostages of Russia. And the idea of a free and independent and democratic country now being under siege by a despotic terrorist by the name of Putin is one that Ukraine did not ask for. But what they said and what I'm hearing is that they are going to stand and fight, and they're not going to let Putin take Ukraine as he thought he would. And that, as we indicated earlier, body bags may be in Ukraine, but body bags will be going home to Russia as well.
Congresswoman, we are glad to hear that you are someplace safe, that you are not in the range of danger. But how long do you plan to stay in the area? Are you continuing any sort of diplomatic talks, or is all of that been frozen at this point?
Well, we're still in discussions with the Organization of Security and Cooperation with Europe. That is the group that we're engaging in. Ukrainians are here. We're concluding our work, but we're going to continue in our distant countries. One of the individuals is leaving soon. He'll be going into Warsaw and then taking a train in. He will not be flying. It'll take him 17 hours to get home. He said that bombs are very close to where he lives and his family lives. But today we engaged in some very sharp-tongued language. And we said this is not Russia's war, this is Putin's war. And we shamed the now head of government of Russia when he utilized the term Nazism, genocide. Ukraine is not engaged in Nazism or genocide. But in my remarks today, I indicated that it is actually Putin who is engaged in wearing the evil hat of Nazism, and that he is, of course, using stormtroopers, using his own soldiers to pursue a senseless, purposeless, immoral war of medieval times. Because this war has no sense to it, it is immoral, and is purposeless. I believe that the nations of the world have united. Sweden and Finland, I believe, will be meeting with NATO tomorrow. NATO is united. The United States is united. How long can Putin continue his own war? And Ukraine is certainly united. My concern, of course, is his move toward Kiev and what will happen to the leadership there, who I know at this point seems unlikely to leave. And I think that will be the ultimate tragedy. That's what we hope to stop, is that any effort to take the government and to deny Ukraine its rightful place in a democratic society, a democratic nation in the world of civilization. Right. Putin is going after innocent people. It breaks my heart as a mother to know that children have died, women have died, families are under siege, and hospitals have been bombed, and places where people live have been bombed. This is near the kind of reckless and horrible way that Nazism took over Europe. But the difference is that they're resistant. Ukraine is strong. They've received a number of weapons from allies, NATO allies, and they have the world to look to for support. We're not going to give up on them. We want them to have their freedom.
And Congresswoman, President Biden...
And Congresswoman,
Sorry, go ahead, Omar.
Go ahead, Tanya. Go ahead, Tanya. Well, Congresswoman, your concerns are valid. Our reporting on the ground says that some Russian paratroopers are outside of Kyiv at an airstrip there and have controlled it. And this is what Tanya was going to talk about. President Biden said a short time ago, and we're not sure your communication ability right now where you are, But President Biden said Putin will pay for this invasion, that this aggression cannot go unanswered. Let's take a listen, see if you can listen in.
Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences. Today, I'm authorizing additional strong sanctions and new limitations on what can be exported to Russia. This is going to impose severe cost on the Russian economy, both immediately and over time. We have purposely designed these sanctions to maximize the long-term impact on Russia and to minimize the impact on the United States and our allies. I want to be clear.
Congresswoman, President Biden reiterated he will not send U.S. troops into Ukraine. Russia has seized Chernobyl, as you mentioned. We understand they're moving in on targets in Kyiv. Dozens of Ukrainian soldiers have died. By the time Russia feels this sanction, I mean, you're nearer on the ground than we are. Will the devastation already be done?
Well, Omar, I think the president is moving appropriately. You're going to see some additional stringent, strong, impossible to overcome sanctions against Russia, sadly against the Russian people, which is evidence that they're not for this war. Russia's economy is soft and weak. His diversity of economics in that country is weak. His basic source is energy. The people are unhappy because it is Putin's war. I think he's going to feel the crush of his own people. And these sanctions dealing financially with cyber issues is going to move quickly. The banking is quickly. It doesn't take time to shut that down. I am recommending that all airline traffic in and out of Russia be stopped immediately. And I'm writing a resolution that I hope will be heard on the floor of the House next week. We are united no matter what our political philosophy. I believe in peace. And in my remarks today at the OSCE, I indicated that we should get back to the peace table, that Russia, Putin should cease and desist and get back to the table. Because as he goes further into Ukraine, whatever he thinks he's going to accomplish, I have heard from them that they're not giving up, they're not standing down, they will not retreat, and they will not express a, if you will, the white flag. They will stand. The sadness of that is there'll be bloodshed at all accounts. Is Putin that dangerous and uncaring that he would do that? And let me just say this. These are terroristic activities. This is someone going into a sovereign nation and sporadically bombing recklessly against civilians. He's not fighting soldiers. Soldiers are stopping him. His bombs are hitting civilian targets. That is terroristic. That is what civilized leaders do not do. And so I'm asking for Mr. Putin to come into the world of civilized leaders and again return to the peace table, because he has blown up UN Charter, the Helsinki Agreement, and the Minsk Agreement. He's blown up international protocols. And I don't know how he can continue to lead. And I think Ukraine is getting the sympathy of the world, and more of the world leaders, whether they're NATO or not, are standing with the people of Ukraine. I don't know how long Russia is going to be able to pursue this. I hope that he sees that freedom is Ukraine's DNA, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and that he will realize that he must come to the table of peace and diplomacy.
Congresswoman, are you worried, though, that Putin could retaliate against the U.S. for these sanctions through cyber attacks or otherwise? I mean, we do understand that he's increasingly isolated, that he's sort of surrounding himself by a group of yes men, that perhaps his touch on reality is a bit, he's losing his sense of reality just a bit. So a person like that could be very, very dangerous.
You're very kind. He is losing his reality. The very fact that he entered into a operation of which he called it that is actually a war, the very fact that he is targeting sites that are civilian sites and that the casualties are going up and people are racing away to save their lives. They're in subways for bomb shelters. Yes, he is. But we are much better prepared. than when I first entered Congress many years ago and experienced 9/11 actually in the United States Capitol during that time. We're much better prepared than when we were in the faulty war, the Iraq War, and in other wars. I believe that the United States is well prepared. I'm on the Cybersecurity Subcommittee and Cybersecurity and Intelligence Subcommittee. We are far more prepared, far more knowledgeable about Russia, about what Russia will be doing. We've shored up our cyber systems much better. It's not perfect. All systems are vulnerable, but ours is far less vulnerable. And I know that the president and his team expected that that might happen. And so I think that we can withstand the attack. And, you know, I think the American people, as they learn what is going on, the bloodshed in Ukraine, will be willing to withstand any such attack so that they can be united for those who are democracy lovers, who are democratic sovereign nations and are under attack. Because what Russia is doing is that they're testing with Ukraine, because his only goal is his own self-aggrandizement, and that is to restore the USSR. That is impossible to do in 2022. That means that nations like Lithuania, that I just came out of as well, that declared a national emergency, Latvia, Estonia, all of these countries may be in the eye of the storm as it relates to Putin. He has to be stopped now. I wish it could be stopped in a peaceful way, a diplomatic way, but I think the United States, and under President Biden's leadership, is not going to yield, because we may suffer as well.
Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee talking to us from Eastern Europe, in the region where the conflict is going, but she's not getting specific for safety reasons. Thank you for your time and for the information, and please stay safe.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for letting America know what is going on here. Thank you again.